Hey, everybody. We're back. Glad to be back. Yeah, let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you all are here tonight. I am back. I have gotten over, I had some nasal drip and spring allergies, and I was just not in a streaming place. But I seem to be back at full speed as of now. I'm talking. I'm not, feeling ill, and I seem to be back in streaming mode. So I'm glad to be here. I'm glad that you all are here. And I have been working hard, just not with my voice. I've been getting a lot done, and there's a lot of exciting things happening right now. But the way we're going to do this stream is the same way we always do streams. First, I give my opening remarks, whatever it is I'm going to talk about for tonight. I'll be talking about as I'm talking about what I'm talking about tonight. I will be taking any questions that people have. If you're on Rumble, you can send a Rumble rant. If you're on YouTube, you can Cash App me with your question. And as the questions come from there, we can, we will do the roll call, and then I'll answer questions in the second half of the show. Now, the way to send questions is questions can be sent on Rumble rant or on Cash App, Caleb Maupin 22. That's the way you can send me questions. I'll just put that in the chat. Caleb Maupin 22 is the way you can send me Cash App. Questions, or you can send them as Rumble rants. Either way, I will get your questions. Those are the ways that you can send your questions, and I answer those in the second half of the show. First, it's opening remarks, then it's roll call, then I answer your questions for the remainder of the program. So if you got something you want me to ask me about, send me a super chat. I will answer it in the second half of the show. You can send it on the Cash App, or you can send it as a Rumble rant. That's the way it works. Now, quick reminder, the most important anti-imperialist event of the year will be coming up on July 12th. July 12th in Chicago is going to be absolutely tremendous. It's going to be great. It's going to be working families first, defeat the deep state, embrace a new world of peace and innovation. And I am so proud of the Chicago members of CPI. They're hanging door knockers on doors. We are moving ahead with building our convention. It's almost May. And so we've got a couple months, and we are going to blow this out of the park, blow the roof off. We're going to build a huge gathering. And I thank everyone who is being supportive of our work. I'm trying to get together the funds we need, going around to different people who've donated to CPI over the years and mobilizing our membership. We're having the 7-day program for people that are coming in from out of town. That's going to be awesome. We're going to have our, internal convention the next day on the 13th. That's going to be exciting. And that'll be live streamed, so you'll be able to watch that online. Scott Ritter's coming on July 12th. Garland Nixon's coming on July 12th. Some other big name people are talking with us and may be coming as well. We're working on that. So it's going to be a big event. So don't miss it. You can register at the link down below. We need you there. If there's one event you come to this year, make it this one. We are going to fill up that auditorium. We are going to talk about Palestine. We are going to talk about Ukraine, Russia. It's going to be quite a gathering. It's not going to be what you expect. We're going to talk about peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, a lot of important guest speakers coming, and a lot of musical performances and dance teams, and wow, it's going to be a shindig. It's going to be quite a shindig in Chicago, and it's we picked it specifically so it would be close to the O'Hare Airport. In the past, we've done our events and they're too far away from things. We picked this so it'd be right next to the Chicago O'Hare Airport. If you're flying in, you can fly straight to O'Hare. We're right there right near the O'Hare Airport. We went out of our way to make it close so that people flying into O'Hare could go right to the event. July 12th is going to be lit. It is going to be great. So we need you there. So go ahead and register. You can register at the links in the description. You got a QR code there you can follow, but we need you there. This is my focus. Between now and July, I am focused on this. And even though I was too sick to stream with the post-nasal drip and all of that, I was calling people and writing out the program. And wow, stuff is coming together. This is going to be amazing. It is going to be utterly amazing. And we're doing what we've always said we're going to do. We're going out of the movement to the masses. We're not just recruiting people that we already know, people who watch these YouTube streams. We're bringing new people. We're going to people. We're going to communities we've never connected with before, organizations we've never worked with before. We're going into neighborhoods and just doing outreach to people. It's really, really exciting what we are doing. And we have recruiting meetings on Wednesday for CPI. We have Saturday afternoon membership meetings, and the energy in those meetings is, it's rising. We're ready to do this. I know Penny is out there in Minnesota and she's building for it. She's got our Houthi book, we have a special edition of our book about Yemen that we published that has the poster of the convention on the back. It's the Houthi book. It's a free edition. We have 1,000 copies. We're giving them away. And then we've got the poster on the back. We're using this to invite people to the event. We're talking with different people from the Russian community. We're talking with different people from different organizations. This is going to be important. And for reasons that I'll get into later in the stream, it's going to be really important. So be there. We just need you to be there. You don't want to miss it. Be in a room with 400 other people who want to end war, who want to have peace with Russia and China and Iran and Venezuela and Cuba and Yemen. Don't miss it. We're going to have speakers on Latin America. A lot is happening. So just mark this, Now, another note, I'm headed out to Los Angeles May 24th. So if you're in the LA area, we were originally going to do that in April, but we decided to push it back a month. So May 24th, I'll be in Los Angeles for a small workshop. So, I look forward to seeing California folks May 24th. That's my next trip coming up, but everything in me is focused on making July a success. So, that's kind of where I'm at. So as I said before, the way these streams work is first I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do a roll call where I find out who's on the other side of the camera, call you out as I see you, names and locations. Then I answer questions. So if you got a question for me to answer, send a Rumble rant on Rumble or Cash App me at Caleb Maupin22 with your question in the subject line. That's the best way to get your question answered. I'll be looking forward to receiving different questions from you all throughout the stream tonight. And we've got, we're going to have a great conversation here tonight. So I'm going to jump into it. Folks, we don't do team sports here. I mean, we don't do team sports here. I said during the last election that Kamala Harris was the worst candidate, that Donald Trump was slightly better. And I stand by that position. But that doesn't mean that I'm happy about a lot that's happening right now. There's a lot of bad things happening right now that I oppose. I oppose what happened recently to the pro-Palestine students that were raided by the FBI. That's wrong. Shouldn't be happening. I oppose the deportation of Mahmoud Khalil. And I oppose this El Salvador stuff. Completely wrong. And that there's no reason that just because I understood that with Kamala Harris, that we'd probably be in World War III right now. With Kamala Harris, Scott Ritter would be in prison. The Uhuru defendants would be in prison. I'd probably be in prison. That with Kamala Harris, there would not be a peace process in Ukraine. With Kamala Harris, there never would have been a 30-day ceasefire in Gaza. With Kamala Harris, we wouldn't be talking and negotiating with Iran. Right? We can understand that Kamala Harris was bad in a lot of ways. and she was worse than Trump. But that doesn't mean that we are okay with what Trump is doing. This idea that you can send people out of the country to a third country, not the country they came from, to do an indefinite prison sentence without due process, without ever having them present evidence about whether they were in a gang, I'm not okay with that. These cartels are horrible. These cartels need to be broken up. I have no problem with people from MS-13 or Tren de Agra being deported from the country. I have no problem with them being imprisoned for their crimes against people. But I do have a problem. I do have a problem with sending them to a third-party country that runs a prison that is not in line with our standards of what prisons are, and sending them to a third country where we can't even get them back from there. I'm not okay with that. And I'm really disappointed that Donald Trump is pursuing that. And I will tell you on this stream why Donald Trump is pursuing that. And that doesn't mean it's okay. It's wrong. And I oppose it, just like I oppose the targeting of pro-Palestine students. That's also wrong. There's plenty that we can criticize. And as I've said from the beginning, really what matters is the balance of forces. No one's going to do it for us. We've got to build an anti-imperialist, anti-globalist movement to fight for working families in this country. That's the only thing that's going to really make a difference. And that there is a new economy in this world that's rising. And that new economy needs to plant its seeds here in the United States. And we need to pivot further away from the Western colonial system, imperialism, globalism, and closer to the rising BRICS economy. And we need a movement, a pro-growth, pro-working families, pro-human movement in this country that demands that we restructure our economy and start investing in our people and start building. We need a society where the centers of economic power are forced to work in the interest of the people overall, and not in the interests of a small, ultra-rich minority. And the technology and the technological advancement that we're seeing right now is making that a necessity. We should be living in the most abundant society ever. We should have more wealth and prosperity than ever before, because we are at the point that human technology is doing amazing things with artificial intelligence, there's just so many breakthroughs happening right now, and we should be living in the most abundant, prosperous world. But yet in our system, where production is not rationally organized, but organized according to profit and according to the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market, we are facing a long-term economic crisis. And this is rooted in the tendency of the falling rate of profit. This is rooted in the value crisis. And this is rooted in the fundamental workings of the economy. And it points to the need for a people-centered government, a pro-people government, to take control of the means of production and rationally organize the economy so that we can have economic growth. And that is what we urgently need. We need a pro-people, pro-humanity government, a government of action to fight for working families. And Donald Trump is not that. And he never was that. And I never said he would be that. All I said was that we're slightly better off with Donald Trump. And right now, emphasis on slightly. However, there is something happening right now that, is potentially huge. It hasn't happened yet. But I'm seeing the announcements that apparently an agreement for peace in Ukraine has already been drawn up. Apparently, Zelensky is psyching up his supporters for it. Apparently, in the next few days, we could be seeing an end to the war in Ukraine. That is what I'm seeing. Now, it's not finalized yet, and I don't know exactly what it would mean, but apparently there is some kind of agreement that could come very shortly to end the war in Ukraine. It's about time. And if that happens, and all the sanctions on Russia are immediately lifted, and the war in Ukraine is ended, that would be huge. And that would be a huge game changer, and that would be a huge plus that came from Trump that would not have come from Kamala Harris. But it hasn't happened yet. So, it ain't over till it's over. And that doesn't cancel out all the other things that are happening that I don't agree with, like what's happening to the pro-Palestine students, like what's, deporting people to El Salvador. But regardless, I want to talk to you about what's happening with, these gangs. I want to talk to you about that because it's really This is Guantanamo Bay all over again. This is Guantanamo Bay all over again. Do you remember Guantanamo Bay? I certainly do. After 9/11, the United States set up a prison in Cuba, on the island of Cuba, in the U.S.-controlled territory of Camp Delta, Guantanamo Bay, Gitmo. And at that facility, which is still open, there were people that were accused of being terrorists, and they were held there, and they were never charged with a crime, and they were not charged as criminals. They were treated as quote unquote enemy combatants, and they were held there. And they were tortured. And what's weird is they were there for decades. And a number of the people in Guantanamo Bay were eventually released, and some of them are now in the Taliban government. There are Taliban government officials who went from Guantanamo Bay to the government of Afghanistan as part of an agreement the United States made with the Taliban as the USA pulled out. I don't understand how that works, but I think I will kind of hint at it as we get going here. But this is Guantanamo Bay all over again. And that this points to an aspect of the situation that we're in that is highly relevant to what we're doing with building the Center for Political Innovation, highly relevant to what we're doing trying to build an anti-imperialist movement. This relates to all the same stuff we talk about on these streams, right? I've been talking to you all about Bonapartism. I've been talking to you all about counter gangs. I've been talking to you all about counterinsurgency strategy and all of this. This is all related. So if you want to understand why we had Guantanamo Bay and still have Guantanamo Bay, and now why there's this prison camp in El Salvador that prisoners are being, accused of being in narco gangs or being deported to, I want to take you back in time to a time in which I was born, the 1980s. I was born in 1987. But the 1980s was a decade in American history. Ronald Reagan became president. He won the 1980 election. He was sworn in 1981. The 1980s was the last decade of the Cold War in the United States. And during the 1980s, there were two wars that the United States fought. And they were not wars in which the U.S. directly sent the military. They were wars where the USA armed extremists, terrorists, to fight against governments. And the first war was in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan in 1978, you had a king, and that king of Afghanistan was neutral between the Soviet Union and America. He was right on the border with the Soviet Union. It was a Muslim country, very poor and underdeveloped in Central Asia. And you had a king, and the Soviet Union did business with him, and the United States did business with him, and he liked both of them. And the Soviet Union gave military training to a lot of his generals, but America also gave military training to some of his generals. And some of his generals really liked the Soviet Union, and they were in a party called the People's Democratic Party. And some of the generals really didn't like the Soviet Union, and they were not in the People's Democratic Party. And Afghanistan was this country in Central Asia that was neutral between the United States and the Soviet Union. And then in 1978, what happened? The king suddenly started cracking down on the People's Democracy Party, the pro-Soviet party that a lot of his generals were members of. He arrested a number of his generals that were in this pro-Soviet military party. And all kinds of leaders of the military who'd gone to the Soviet Union to get military training, who, believed in communism, were part of the People's Democracy Party, they were like, oh my God, we're going to be arrested. And so in order to not be arrested, they had a coup and they overthrew the king and they established the People's Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. They called it the Saur Revolution, S-A-U-R revolution, but it wasn't really a revolution. It was a military coup that was forced on Afghanistan. And we now know why it was forced on Afghanistan. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the advisor to Jimmy Carter, forced it to happen. And he called it the Afghan trap. And he did an interview with a French newspaper where he said that they pressured the king to outlaw the People's Democracy Party, to arrest his generals, to force a situation where the pro-Soviet wing of the Afghan military would take power prematurely. Because they knew that while a lot of the high-ranking generals in Afghanistan were pro-Soviet, most of the population in the rural areas was deeply conservative. And very religious and very anti-communist. And that if the pro-Soviet generals took power, they wouldn't have support in the rural areas. The deeply conservative religious folks who lived up in the mountains wouldn't support their government, wouldn't support a pro-Soviet government. And so that's what happened. In 1978, you had the People's Democratic Government of Afghanistan that took power to avoid being killed. They took power prematurely, and almost as soon as they took power, there were terrorists pouring into Afghanistan from other parts of the Muslim world. And one of them was a guy named Osama bin Laden, who was a wealthy Saudi Muslim extremist. And he went to Afghanistan and he had started rallying rural people in the countryside to fight against the government of the People's Democratic Party. And so the generals, the pro-Soviet generals who took power in Afghanistan, what did they do? They turned to the Soviet Union. They said, we need you to protect us. We need you to send military support. And the Soviet Union had dealt with Muslim extremists before. In Chechnya, there had been an Islamic extremist uprising against the Soviet Union that had killed lots of innocent people. And they knew that these Islamic extremists, they didn't like the Soviet Union. They didn't like communism, and they didn't want Afghanistan to become a base to spread extremism among the Muslims in the southern Soviet Union. And they also had to support their friends. These generals that supported them had taken power, and so the Soviet Union had to send its military to Afghanistan. They really had no choice. Right on their border, there was an anti-communist, fanatical, extremist, terrorist movement that was threatening one of their allies, so they had to go in. And that was called the Afghan War. And it was really set up by the United States. It was the Afghan trap. And the United States did not send its military to Afghanistan. Many people thought the United States would send its military to Afghanistan. The USA brought back draft registration, right? Jimmy Carter brought back draft registration. And Jimmy Carter also boycotted the 1980 Olympic Games. And they did everything they could, but the USA didn't directly send soldiers to Afghanistan. What did the USA do? They worked with the government of Pakistan. They worked with the government of Saudi Arabia, and they flooded Afghanistan with weapons, and they had training camps in Pakistan, and they had training camps in Saudi Arabia, and they arranged for Muslim extremists from all over the Middle East to go to Afghanistan and fight against the Soviet Union. And 2 to 3 million people died. This was a war that was forced on Afghanistan by the United States, and 2 to 3 million people died, and it was very, very awful. And the Soviet Union eventually pulled its troops out in the late 1980s, and the People's Democracy Party of Afghanistan held on to power up until 1993, and then they fell. And then after the confusion, after they fell, there was a fight, and among the Islamic extremists who drove them out, the Taliban emerged, and that's where the Taliban comes from. So what was the Taliban? The Taliban was a proxy of the United States. The United States didn't directly fight the Soviet Union. Why? Because the USA had just lost in Vietnam. And if the USA were to have directly fought the Soviet Union, the Afghans would have said, this is the Western occupier coming to oppress us. And they would have rallied and they would have supported the Soviet Union to fight the West. It would have been Vietnam all over again. However, instead of having Afghanistan be flooded with American troops, they instead flooded Afghanistan with Muslims, and the Afghan people were also Muslims, right? And the Afghan people were against the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was atheist, and so it was an Islamic jihad to defend Islam from the atheist communists, and it was staged, but it wouldn't have worked if the USA had directly fought the Soviet Union. If the USA had occupied Afghanistan, it wouldn't have worked. It had to be framed as the poor oppressed Muslims fighting a foreign occupier, fighting the Soviet Union, fighting big mighty Russia that's trying to bring its atheism into Afghanistan. Now, that was very key. That was very, very key. They were using proxies. And these terrorists that the USA backed in Afghanistan were some bad motherfuckers. And we know that now, right? We know that at this point, because Osama bin Laden, everyone agrees, was a bad motherfucker. But even at the time, people knew they were bad motherfuckers. One thing that they did was that in the areas where the People's Democracy Party held power, women were told they no longer had to wear headscarves. They no longer had to cover their heads. Why? Because that was considered an old traditional Islamic thing, and they were liberating the women, giving women equality. So women were taking off their headscarves. Well, the People's Democracy Party had that policy of empowering Afghan women. So Osama bin Laden and his buddies started going around with acid, and throwing acid onto the faces of any women who didn't wear a headscarf. Now, that's a pretty evil, nasty thing to do. Thousands of women were disfigured for life because some religious extremists thought that they were not following the Quran, and they splashed, they splashed, acid on their faces. I mean, it's just an evil thing to do. An evil thing to do. Absolutely evil. And on top of that, there were literacy volunteers. One way that the pro-Soviet government was trying to win over support among the population was they sent teachers to rural Afghanistan to teach people how to read. They were teaching women how to read alongside men. And they were teaching them how to read non-religious books, right? They would not begin their classes with Islamic prayers. They would read books that were not Islamic. And so Osama bin Laden and his buddies would hang literacy volunteers. And that's what they announced. Anyone who's teaching literacy will kill them if we take control of the area. And they did that. They took control of certain areas, and somebody was teaching people how to read, and they hung them. And they hung people for teaching people to read. Not cool. Not cool. Not good people. Osama bin Laden and his crew of people were not good folks. And the Taliban are not good folks, right? They're pretty nasty motherfuckers. Pretty evil. It takes a pretty heartless, ruthless, evil person to pour acid on a woman's face. It takes a pretty heartless, evil person to hang somebody and give them the death penalty for teaching people to read, right? These are pretty evil people. Now, obviously, war is hell. I'm sure, there were atrocities committed by the Soviet Union during the war at various points. I have no doubt about that. But at the same time, the USA was basically, they realized they couldn't fight the Soviet Union and Afghanistan on their own. So they created a counter gang. And this is a term that comes out of insurgency. It's called a counter gang, right? Where you create your own extremist movement. If you're fighting an insurgency, right? You create, instead of fighting them directly with the military, you create your own other insurgency to fight them. And this is a counterinsurgency tactic. It was pioneered by Frank Kitson of the British military. He did it first in Kenya. In Kenya, you had an uprising against the British called the Land and Freedom Army. And the way he defeated it was he created his own rebels. And there were other rebel groups that he created that pretended to be Mau Mau, Land and Freedom Army fighters, that claimed they were the real Mau Mau, and the actual Mau Mau were sellouts and phonies, and they confused everybody, right? And they created a counter gang, right? And then he did this in Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, the population was rallying behind the IRA to fight against the British Army. And so Frank Kitson realized that was kind of bad optics because the British Army was the British Empire and the Irish people were going to support them. So what he did was, because most of the IRA sympathizers were Catholic, they started having the British government secretly give money and weapons to fanatical Protestants. And the fanatical Protestants would murder IRA fighters. And instead of it being the mighty British Empire versus the Irish people, it became Catholics versus Protestants, and it got very demoralizing. And then they funded different factions of the IRA, and they funded armed, criminal organizations to negotiate agreements with the IRA about selling drugs. And they created a situation where it got so confusing and so ugly that the British Empire was ultimately able to win in Northern Ireland. You had the Good Friday Agreement. And that creating a counter gang is a method of fighting your enemy in what we call fourth generation warfare, right? In the era post-World War II, in the age of nuclear weapons, it's not safe for America and Russia to go to war. Why? That would end humanity. There would be a nuclear exchange. It's not safe for America and China to go to war. Why? That would end humanity. There would be a nuclear exchange. And so if you want to have America and Russia fight each other, what happens is America backs a counter gang or a proxy force or a non-state actor to fight against a government that's aligned with Russia, and vice versa. And this is what's called fourth generation warfare, where the use of non-state actors as proxies and the cultivation of extremist organizations is utilized as a method for waging warfare. But there's a little bit of a problem with this method, is that these non-state actors, these counter gangs, these extremists, they tend to have their own interests. For example, Osama bin Laden, he absolutely killed lots of Russians. He hated communism and all of that, but he also hated America. And it seems that he was pretty heavily involved in bringing down the Twin Towers. Now, people ask, did they allow it to happen? Was there a bigger conspiracy? There's a lot of things about the official story of 9/11 that don't add up. But regardless, it looks like Osama bin Laden was pretty involved in it happening. And Osama bin Laden and his folks, they hated America just as much as they hated Russia, right? They had their own interest. And that's the truth about non-state actors, is they ultimately have their own interest. And so at the same time that this war was going on in Afghanistan, and the USA was building up this extremist force, this counter gang of Wahhabi fanaticism, and was allowing Saudi Arabia to set up radical Muslim schools all over the world to recruit people to be terrorists to fight against the Soviet Union. They set up Deobandi schools in India to radicalize the Muslim community of India. They had all kinds of, it was a whole thing. It was a global movement of Wahhabism, of the Saudi ideology. At the same time, there was another part of the world. It's a lot closer to home. It's called Central America. And Central America is a place where you had a government that came to power around the same time, 1979. In Nicaragua, you had the Sandinista revolution, where a socialist Marxist political party called the Sandinistas, the Sandinista National Liberation Front of Nicaragua, took power. And they took power, and they immediately faced an insurgency. And that insurgency involved all kinds of different people. There was a general in the Nicaraguan military who was originally for them and turned against them. There were some indigenous groups that took up arms against the Sandinistas. But one big fighting force against the Sandinistas was drug cartels. And drug cartels were heavily involved in smuggling weapons into Nicaragua, fighting against the Sandinista government. And what was interesting, and this is also true because Osama bin Laden and his buddies in Afghanistan, they sold heroin. Why were they selling heroin? And why were drug cartels heavily involved in the war in Nicaragua? Because it's a way for them to make money without being directly supported, right? In Nicaragua, the U.S. Congress actually outlawed funding the Contras of Nicaragua because there was so much outrage because they killed a number of priests and nuns, and they targeted Roman Catholics because the Catholic Church was considered to be collaborating with the Sandinistas. The U.S. Congress actually made a law that it was illegal for the U.S. government to directly give funding to the Contras. So a way of getting around that was the Contras could sell drugs. They could sell drugs in America, and the American government would look the other way and not arrest them. And that's what happened. And in Arkansas, there was an airstrip where the Contras were flying into Arkansas with plane loads of cocaine to sell across America. And Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas at the time, and they looked the other way and they didn't get arrested, right? And there was all kinds of cocaine and crack brought into the United States by the Contras in the 1980s. And they made lots of money flooding America's streets with cocaine. And they used that money to then fight against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And the narcos of Latin America, all of them basically traced back to this time. Was there cocaine in Central America before that? Of course. Were there drugs in Central America before that? Of course. But when you have the American government basically subsidizing, finding people that are fighting against the Sandinistas and saying, hey guys, you're against the Sandinistas, we'll set up an airstrip for you in Arkansas where you can fly all the cocaine into America that you want, and we'll look the other way and you won't get arrested. And we're going to conveniently find ways for you to get guns. And there was Iran-Contra. We know about, like, even though it was illegal for them to get support, there was the arms for hostages and the whole thing. And that there were all kinds of ways the U.S. government was basically helping drug cartels set up shop in Nicaragua and El Salvador to fight against the communists, to fight against the war. And these drug cartels are nasty motherfuckers. They're not nice people, right? These drug cartels are known to show up at schools in low-income areas in Guatemala and Honduras and Mexico, and they'll walk into the schools with guns, and they'll say, all right, that guy looks good, he's coming with us, right? And they'll just abduct and recruit young teenage boys. And if a teenage boy says, well, I don't want to go, they shoot him in front of the class and kill him in front of everybody. Really nasty motherfuckers, not nice people, right? A friend of ours, shout out to the person who's watching, they were recently in Mexico, and there was somebody who got murdered while they were down there because he apparently owed money to a drug cartel. He borrowed money from a drug cartel, and so he got killed, right? He just got shot, right in the same area. These drug cartels murder people all the time, just like the Wahhabis in Afghanistan are pouring acid on women's faces, just like the Taliban was hanging people for teaching people to read. These drug cartels are nasty motherfuckers, and they killed priests and nuns, and they murdered people, and they forcibly abducted teenage boys and recruited them. And that doesn't mean that the other side didn't do bad things also. That doesn't mean the Sandinistas didn't commit atrocities. That doesn't mean that there weren't bad things done by the other side in the war. But what I'm telling you is that the USA cultivated drug cartels in Central America during the 1980s as a mechanism for fighting against the Sandinista government. And this wasn't only in Central America. Colombia is a country where you've had a communist insurgency for a long time, the FARC. And the U.S. government backed the Colombian government in fighting the FARC, the communist rebel group. But they also realized that the Colombian government, they had to follow certain laws, whatever. And so in Colombia, they started setting up what were called paramilitary organizations that were anti-communist and aligned with the Colombian government, but were not officially part of the military. And those forces were drug cartels. And the paramilitaries of Colombia were selling cocaine and smuggling cocaine. And the CIA was doing the same thing where, we look the other way. You can bring drugs into the country. We just look the other way because that's a way you can raise money. And we're not directly giving you money. We're just subsidizing you. Just like they did with the Mujahideen of Afghanistan, right? They were selling heroin, smuggling heroin from Afghanistan into Pakistan, and the U.S. government and all of them were looking the other way. And that was a way they could make money for themselves. And so we have these two extremist forces that we've got, the Mujahideen, the Wahhabi extremists, the Saudi Islamic extremist Osama bin Laden folks in the Middle East. And we've got the drug cartels of Central America. Now, the drug cartels of Central America, it's not like they used to be supported by the American government and then it stopped. This one gang that we're hearing so much about, Tren de Aragua, right, in Venezuela. I am so angry that nobody is saying this. I say this, and I will scream it at the top of my lungs, and Nicolas Maduro is saying it. This is an anti-Maduro gang. They are Maduro's worst enemies. They're people that Maduro threw in prison. They've been fighting to overthrow Maduro for years. Maduro, the socialist leader of Venezuela, hates Tren de Aragua. And they're people they're gangsters and criminals that he's thrown in jail. That's who they are. They are anti-communist extremists. Many of the Tren de Aragua people in America that are here right now, that are being rounded up by Trump, many of those people are people that went directly from prison, from Maduro's prison. They got out of prison and then they said, I'm oppressed. I'm being oppressed by a brutal communist dictator. And we gave them a visa. We have a policy in America that if you're fleeing a communist dictatorship, we give you automatic papers. We give you a green card. And so these guys, most of them were criminals, were involved in this violent drug gang in Venezuela that's done awful things, that was working with the American government to try and overthrow Maduro. And then we brought them to the United States to, they're victims of a communist government. And so, this gang is an anti-Maduro gang that works for the American government in fighting against Maduro. And now they're over here terrorizing old ladies and kidnapping people and doing awful things. Well, that's because they're bad motherfuckers. That's what happens, right? If you have a dog and you intentionally give it rabies and you intentionally starve it so it's really, really hungry, and then you take the leash off of it, that dog, it's got foam out of its mouth and big fangs, it might bite you, right? I mean, and that's what happens, right? I mean, these are not sensible people. These drug cartels that can murder elderly old women who've done nothing to anybody, that can rape and murder. I mean, you read about the things these drug cartels do. These are not rational criminals. These are not, normal, healthy people who decided to break the law. These are not people with a drug addiction problem, right? These are nasty motherfuckers. And the same for the Wahhabis of Afghanistan, right? These are not people who just out of their religious faith feel they must take up the gun. No, people like that don't throw acid in women's faces. People like that don't hang literacy volunteers. There's a certain type of ruthless killer that gets cultivated. These extremist gangs in Latin America, the narcos, the Contras, anyone who's been down there and dealt with those people realizes you're dealing with a level of evil. You're dealing with a level of viciousness and brutality that is not normal, right? These guys have been brainwashed and desensitized to the point that they can do unbelievably evil things. And the same, ISIS. People said ISIS fighters, there was something about them. They didn't look right. They looked almost like they were possessed by the devil in the way that they operated. You're not dealing with rational human beings who just happen to believe. No. When you're dealing with ISIS, when you're dealing with these Contras, you're dealing with brainwashed, ruthless super soldier killers. All right. That's what you're dealing with. And let me add, the fact that anyone is trying to deny this is ridiculous, right? The left is right that the El Salvador thing is wrong. The left is right that Guantanamo Bay shouldn't have existed. And I'll get to all of that in a second. But these are still nasty motherfuckers. And anyone who tries to tell you these are not nasty motherfuckers, I'm sorry. Anyone who tries to act like Tren de Aragua or MS-13 or those groups are not evil, they're evil, right? And people live in terror of them. They destroy lives. They torture. They rape. They're vile and evil on a level we can't even imagine. And the same goes for ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the predecessor of ISIS. Those are evil motherfuckers. They do really, really, really evil things. So don't, when I hear liberals gloss over it and say, well, that's racist, Caleb. No, it's not racist. Well, it's actually the American government that's evil. I agree. But these people were trained by the American government. The American government and the CIA created these people. Like, come on, right? Come on. I mean, it's just infuriating to me. Absolutely infuriating to me. That people are like, that the left is covering for these people. They're covering for Osama bin Laden. They're covering for Tren de Aragua. Like, come on. And it's not like the relationship ended, right? The Contras of Nicaragua, look it up. Cocaine dealers, all of that. The paramilitaries in Colombia, that's U.S. government. But, Tren de Aragua, they were a gang that was working against Maduro, that was look this up. You can look it up, right? You can look it up. Look them up. And look up the prison, look up that they were all in prison in Venezuela. They worked against Maduro, and now they're in the United States, and we were letting them in. They were asylum seekers, meaning that they said they were victims of a communist dictatorship, and that's why they were let in. And I was raising the alarm from the beginning. I was saying, they don't let pro-Maduro Venezuelans into the United States, folks. If you are, part of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, they don't let you into the country. They let you become an asylum seeker if you're working against Maduro, okay? And these folks were in prison, most of them in Venezuela. They got out of prison and they became asylum seekers in America. They're anti-communists, right? And all of this, again, so I'm trying to get to understand what's happening now. I'm trying to get you all to understand this, right? Right. And before I say that, I guess, it's the same for in Mexico, right? In Mexico, the drug cartels have weapons provided by the American government, right? The U.S. government gives weapons to the Mexican police for decades. We've been giving U.S. military grade weapons to the Mexican police, and somehow those weapons end up in the hands of the drug cartels, right? And in fact, they've done studies that like half the weapons, at least, that the drug cartels in Mexico have were provided, come from the United States. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. So all of this, right, raises the question, so what's going on? Well, the El Salvador thing is like Guantanamo, right? In Guantanamo Bay, you had all these people that were part of this counter gang the U.S. government had set up. And they were, after 9/11, there was a big crackdown on them, and they were taken to Guantanamo Bay, and they weren't taken to a regular prison. And that was the big thing, I remember Obama said he was going to shut down Guantanamo Bay and try them in regular prisons. And there was all this outrage. Oh no, it's too dangerous. You can't have a trial for them. They wanted a special prison, and they didn't want them to be charged with crimes. They didn't want them to be having the rights that a regular prisoner has. They wanted them in a special place where they could control them, a special controlled environment. And you'll notice they didn't then send them back to prisons in America. They then, a lot of them, I mean, some of them are still there, but a lot of them they sent to Afghanistan. They sent them back to Afghanistan to be part of the Taliban government. And I got to tell you, here in New York City, they had an art exhibit of Guantanamo Bay art. Okay, and this is so weird, right? So that, the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, they don't have much to do, right? So they had a prison, I guess they have an art program. And I went and I looked at this art exhibit of paintings done by Guantanamo Bay prisoners. And it was all of the ocean. And I thought, oh, that must be because, that's what they see. They're in Guantanamo Bay and all of that. And then they had a sign at the exhibit. Keep in mind, there are no windows at the Guantanamo Bay facility. They cannot see the ocean. I'm like, that is weird as hell. So they're painting pictures of the ocean, but they can't see the ocean. Something's off, right? And you read the details. Some has come out about what happened at Guantanamo Bay, how they would just brutalize these guys, right? They would do things, but these guys were already fucked in the head. To be Al-Qaeda, you have to already be pretty fucked in the head. These are not normal people. And so they're doing some weird psychological operations. And then it turns around and some of these Taliban, they send them back to be leaders of the Taliban. What was going on at Guantanamo Bay? I'm sorry, if you have some person and you have total control over them, you have control, they're in a cell, you control who they talk to, you control what they watch, you control what they read for 20 years, you can really influence and fuck with that person's mind. And these Taliban officials that were in Guantanamo for so long, and now they're in Afghanistan. I'm asking questions about MK Ultra, right? I'm asking questions. And honestly, I think the same thing is happening in El Salvador, right? Because if you put these guys in real prisons, we'd know what was happening to them. They would be charged with actual crimes and the conditions. They would be transparent. There'd be records of what was being done to them. It seems to me that this is another counter gang. Tren de Aragua and MS-13 is another counter gang. These narcos have always been counter gangs. And they want to control them. And they want to do they want to get them in a place where they can have control over them. And it looks like that's the situation. And I'm against it. And I'll tell you why I'm against it. Because this sets a very scary precedent, right? This sets a very, 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 very scary precedent, which is that the Guantanamo Bay thing was wrong too, because anyone could be sent there, without charges. The idea that you could be held without charges goes against the American Constitution. It's called habeas corpus. In order to hold the body, you must charge someone with a crime, and a judge has to see the crime and say, okay, and all of that. You can't detain people indefinitely without charges, right? In New York City, I think you can be, they arrest you for 26 hours, 72 hours, but after a certain amount of time, they have to charge you with a crime and then either grant you bail or not grant you bail. But they can't hold you indefinitely without charges. Well, George W. Bush said, actually, I can. I'm going to call it indefinite detention. And then that continued. And under Obama, they passed a law for the military to indefinitely detain people. And then Obama took it even further. And he said, on top of that, I have the right to execute people, to kill people without due process. There was a terrorist, one of these extremists, and he was a U.S. citizen who was an al-Qaeda guy, and he was in Africa. And Obama killed him with a drone. I think it was in Somalia, and he killed him with a drone. And the guy never had a trial. And he never had legal proceedings. And the president of the United States executed him with a drone. That's illegal. Folks, you can't get the death penalty. The American government can't kill you without a trial. And that applies to everybody, but it especially applies to American citizens. But, Obama said, hey, this guy, he's a terrorist, and, I'm just going to kill him with no due process. He prayed about it first, he said. He prayed about it first. That's illegal, completely illegal, and that's wrong. And what Trump is doing now with this El Salvador thing is absolutely wrong. You cannot hold somebody without charges. You cannot deport somebody without charges. You cannot deport somebody to a third country. You can't send somebody to a third country to go to a prison when they don't have the opportunity to go before a judge and say that they're not. It's wrong. And I'm hugely disappointed to see Donald Trump doing this. I really am. I think Trump was the better candidate in the last election, but this is an awful hill to die on for Donald Trump. It's indefensible. It's wrong. It's wrong. You can't deport American citizens to a prison in another country without due process. And this prison is a prison that does not meet American human rights standards. And he wants to deport not only non-citizens, but even U.S. citizens there. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. Trump shouldn't be doing this. But I'm not here to just tell you it's wrong and beat my chest and go, oh, it's wrong. I mean, okay, if I did that, that's great. But you can see that on any podcast. I'm here to tell you what's going on. This is U.S. imperialism trying to control its counter gangs. That's what's going on. And this is a mechanism for trying to control and threaten and discipline counter gangs. Because you'll notice that after Guantanamo Bay was created, right, you had Guantanamo Bay, and all these Muslims were rounded up and taken to Guantanamo Bay without charges. And they were there for a long time. And some of them were released. And then you'll notice, out of the blue, you started having radical Muslim insurgencies. When Obama took office, you had the Arab Spring, and then in Libya, and then later in Syria, you had radical Muslim insurgencies. And in many cases, these were former Guantanamo inmates who were leading it. And ISIS emerged out of the forces that the United States backed in Syria to fight against Assad and against the Syrian government. And it seems like the USA had determined we've lost control of al-Qaeda. So we're going to set up a facility and we're going to round up as many big name al-Qaeda people. We're going to take them to this facility and we're going to work on them for a decade. And we're going to, work on them for 5-10 years. And then we're going to let them out. And then we're going to use them to fight against Gaddafi and to fight against Assad. And it looks to me like that may be what's going on here, as the USA feels it's lost control of Tren de Aragua. It's lost control of MS-13. So it's going to get the top, biggest leaders of this bloodthirsty gang, and it's going to take them to a special facility in El Salvador and work on them for a few years and then let them go and then use them to fight somebody else. And I view this as intelligence. I view this as fourth generation warfare and counterinsurgency. And that's what I think is going on here. And it's wrong, and it shouldn't be happening. There's another aspect to this. Let me just speak to this. There are, I've spoken about this many times, divisions within the deep state in America. There are divisions, and that I believe there are sections of the American government that are not happy with these counter gangs. When the drug cartels kill somebody, the police show up and they see the dead bodies and they interview the victims and they're horrified by it. And they say, what in the world? And then when they're going to go arrest the local drug cartels, the feds say, no, you can't arrest them. There's an operation we can't tell you about going on. You got to leave them alone. That upsets them. The feds want to stop a terrorist attack. And they, some guy gets a visa because he helped the United States in Chechnya. He fought against Russia in Chechnya as a Chechen separatist. And so they gave him a visa. He fought in Afghanistan, and they gave him a visa. He fought against Assad in Syria and they gave him a visa. And some terrorism experts in the Pentagon say, wait, this guy's Al-Qaeda. This guy's an extremist. And the CIA says, nope, we're giving him a visa. That was our deal. We made with him to help him, to encourage him, to reward him for fighting against Assad. And he gets into the country. And they don't like that. And it's worth pointing out, and I've said this over and over and over again, if you look at the people who've carried out a number of the terrorist attacks on American soil, who are they? Zarnev brothers, great example. Zarnev brothers, they were at the concert in Boston, or not the concert, the Boston Marathon. They were at the Boston Marathon. They blew it up. Who are they? The Zarnev brothers, their parents fought against Russia. They were anti-Russian extremists who fought against Russia in Chechnya. They were Chechen separatists. Do you remember Chechnya, the insurgency against Russia? That's who their parents were. And their parents moved to the United States, got visas conveniently for being part of this anti-Russia operation, got visas. And then their kids were weird and had mental health issues, which is pretty understandable if your parents are terrorists, right? As bad as you think your parents were, at least they weren't pouring acid on women's faces or hanging literacy volunteers. But if your parents have been involved in a brutal insurgency, like, the Chechen extremists, like the Taliban in Afghanistan, your kids are going to grow up with some problems, right? It's going to be, it's not going to be the best childhood. Your parents have a very big impact on you. And if your parents are literally terrorists, you're going to have issues. And these Zarnev brothers, these guys, they grew up, they had terrorist parents and they grew up in America and something wasn't right. And they were on the internet talking to other Chechens, and the Russian government noticed what they were doing and said, ooh, there's some scary guys here in Boston. And they went to the American government and they said, watch these Zarnev brothers. These guys are scary. We're reading they monitored the Chechen Islamic web forums. They said, these guys are dangerous. Watch them. The American government didn't listen. What happened? They blew up the Boston Marathon. And another example, this is the most blatant example. In Britain, there was a guy who was an Islamic extremist, and he and his dad were Islamic extremist Libyans. They hated Gaddafi. They hated Gaddafi because he gave rights to women, because he was industrializing the country, because he wasn't a good Muslim. And so the British government gave them guns as Islamic extremists and sent them to Libya to fight against Gaddafi. And they did, and they fought against Gaddafi, and it was a brutal insurgency, and they lynched African guest workers, and it was awful. You read about the awful things the anti-Gaddafi Islamic extremists did. Well, then they went back to Britain. They're British citizens, right? They got their visa or whatever, anti-Gaddafi Libyans. After fighting to overthrow Gaddafi, they went back to Britain. And then there was a concert in Manchester where some woman was dancing scantily clad. They thought it was sinful. They blew up the Manchester concert. The Manchester bomber was an anti-Gaddafi fighter. Look it up. This is a fact. He was an anti-Gaddafi fighter. The USA was happy to let him be a terrorist against Gaddafi, but it just so happens that if you train somebody to be nutty enough to do the evil things that the terrorists against Gaddafi did, they're going to come back to America and they're going to come back to Britain. And, there was the New Jersey bomber. All right. His parents were terrorists. They fought against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. And he blew up a couple buildings up in New Jersey. This happens over and over and over again. Omar Mateen, the guy who shot up the Pulse nightclub, his father was a U.S. aligned Afghan who was working to fight against the Afghan government, fight against the Soviet Union. Right? You look up the details, right? This happens over and over again. The U.S. government has this policy of training Islamic extremists, training bloodthirsty, ruthless Islamic extremists. And so when we have attacks committed in America by bloodthirsty, ruthless Islamic extremists, it happens to be them, who attack us. It's the ones that we trained. And the same for these drug cartels, right? The U.S. government used drug cartels against Maduro in Venezuela. The U.S. government used drug cartels against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua in the 80s, but even now, right? They had some unrest in Nicaragua a few years back, and it was drug cartels. And in fact, they interviewed some of the kids that were running through the streets of Nicaragua, breaking windows and such. And they asked them, why are you here? And they said, the drug cartels gave us money. They said we had to come here and riot, and they gave us money. A lot of the kids in Nicaragua who were rioting against Daniel Ortega and against the Sandinistas, they weren't even They weren't even political. They just, some drug cartel gave them money. The local drug dealer said, here's $100. Now go, break some windows tomorrow. And they didn't even know about the politics, right? And that this policy of utilizing proxy forces, utilizing counter gangs, right? This policy is bad for America. And this is, Guantanamo Bay and the El Salvador thing, I think fits in with that policy. But I oppose it. And please do not think that just because I said Trump was the lesser of two evils in the last election, which I still think was true. And we will see. We will see if this Russia peace deal happens. We will see. But even still, there never would have been a ceasefire without Trump. The USA would not be negotiating with Iran right now without Trump. There certainly wouldn't be negotiations with Russia right now without Trump. At the end of the day, folks, the only thing that is going to make things better is if the new economy can set up shop over here, right? There are two economies in the world right now, and one is the Western imperialist system that at this point is trying to degrow and destabilize and spread chaos around the world. And the other is the BRICS, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Bolivarian alternative of Latin America, the axis of resistance in the Middle East. And that's all about growth. That's all about building. It's about construction. They want stability, and they have an economy where profits are not in command, where the irrationality of the market is not in command. Folks, self-driving cars should be a great thing because the chore called driving should no longer be necessary. But under our irrational system, self-driving cars would lead to mass poverty and unemployment, riots in the streets, millions of unemployed truck drivers and Uber drivers. This is not rational, right? And we have a system where the more efficient production becomes, the more abundance we create, the more chaos there is on the market and the poorer everybody gets. And outside of the West, in the BRICS sections of the world, in the Russian and Chinese sphere of influence, they don't have this problem. They have other problems. Sure. And these are very poor countries starting out from a very much lower level of development. But the reason China's economy has just continued rising, and they're always predicting that China is going to have a big economic meltdown, and it never happens, is because they have a planned economy where the banks and the centers of economic power are rationally organized to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few, and they can keep building. The profits are not in command. The market is not in command. That is the difference, right? They have a government that came out of an anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolution that controls the economy and allows growth to continue. And that's what we need over here. And it's not going to come about because Caleb says so. It's going to come about because a number of people in America realize that is in their economic interest. It's going to come about because working families in Utah and Idaho and Pennsylvania start saying we need stability, because business owners start saying we need roads paved, because communities come together and they say we need some high-speed railway. And it's going to come together when the majority of the American people say we need economic growth and we need a government of action that'll fight for working families. And our job is to lay the basis for that understanding. We are the ultimate American patriots. We are the people who love America enough to say, by God, we need a government that doesn't bomb people in Africa and Asia and Latin America, but builds roads and highways in Pennsylvania, Texas, Idaho, and Michigan. We are the ultimate patriots. We reject a globalist, imperialist system that is not to our benefit. And we call for the military to be brought home and put to work building high-speed railways across this country. We call for all the money that's spent destroying and killing people overseas to be spent right here in America, building, constructing, hiring, and investing. We want a national bank that will invest in communities. We want public control of our oil and gas and natural resources. We want a mass employment program to hire all the unemployed people in this country and put them to work building America, rebuilding America's infrastructure. We want a government that invests in the people with an economic bill of rights and provides education, provides health care, provides employment, not as a handout, but as an investment. Because if we want a strong country, we need smart, educated people. We need engineers. We need doctors. We need scientists. We need healthy people who are strong and fit. We need happy people. We need the labor of every human being to be utilized in rebuilding this country. That's our 4-point plan. A national bank, public control of natural resources, mass hiring to rebuild the country, and an economic bill of rights. Those 4 points are the Center for Political Innovation's economic program to rebuild America. And we call it a government of action that fights for working families. And in order to get those 4 things, you would have to defeat the power of the bankers. You'd have to defeat the power of the oil monopolies. And you would have to build a mass movement of working people, working class people, small business owners, communities, to demand these things, to push back and beat back Wall Street power. And that's what we need in America. That's what we need. And we call it innovationism. Because ultimately, by investing in people, we're investing in human creativity, human innovation, human brilliance, the ability to get beyond our problems, to invent, to reinvent our relationship with nature, to reach new soaring heights, to change the world around us and make it better. We're demanding that. And we're building an organization dedicated to opposing this global system of imperialism and globalism, and to empowering people in communities to build and construct. We're building a movement calling for a government of action that fights for working families and opposing globalism, imperialism, opposing the emerging low-wage police state, which includes deporting people without due process. That's a low-wage police state, and we oppose that. That includes demanding that we not have a closer move toward World War III, right? We need to build a global, an anti-imperialist movement. We are the ultimate patriots. Nobody loves America as much as we do, because we have a program to save America from the nightmare of what the big bankers and monopolies have led us to, this global system that is leading to death and destruction around the world. And we see how China has been rejuvenated, the Chinese dream. We see how Putin fixed Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. We see what Libya was like under the leadership of Gaddafi. We see what has happened when countries take control of their economy and start mobilizing people to build. And we say, if that worked for them, it'll work for us here. And that imperialism is just as much an enemy of you and me as it is the enemy of the people around the world. And the future of the American people is in alliance with Russia, in alliance with China, in alliance with Nicaragua, in alliance with Iran and Cuba and Venezuela, and against Wall Street and London, the imperialist globalist system that is grinding us into poverty, that is pushing degrowth and Malthusianism and anti-human ideology. We love humanity, human beings, and our creativity. We are the source of all wealth in this world. Human beings are beautiful and amazing, and we celebrate human creativity and brilliance, and we are dedicated to love and celebration. We are pro-family, pro-community, pro-country. We are patriots, and we are anti-globalist and anti-imperialist. That's what we are. And that's the movement called the Center for Political Innovation. And that's what we're trying to build. And that's what we're all about. So, yeah, I mean, that's where I'm at with all of this. We are pro-single people, too. We're pro-humanity. Pro-humanity, absolutely. And we're doing it. We're doing it. And, it's really exciting what we're doing. And, we have a lot of work to do now between now and our convention this summer. And the convention is just the beginning. One thing that we are becoming more and more dedicated to as part of our program is opposing political violence. Right. And I mean, that is going to become an essential part of what we do, because the strategy right now of the deep state is that they want to create a situation where politics gets so ugly and messy, people don't get involved. No, I'm just being serious. Right now, it's really hard to get people to come to events. It's a lot harder to fill up that auditorium than it used to be, because people don't want to come to events, especially people in our circles, because there's so much shit talking. There's so much bullying, cancel culture. People fight with each other on the internet. People get demoralized, and it makes people scared to come to things. But imagine what it was like if people were afraid of getting shot. Imagine if people wouldn't go to events because they were afraid of getting shot. Well, that's how it was in Italy during the years of lead. And that was how they prevented Italy from leaving NATO. The majority of the Italian people wanted to break out of NATO. And they prevented it by fomenting a prolonged episode of unrest in Italy, of violence called Operation Gladio. It was called the Years of Lead. And that's why they're romanticizing Luigi Mangione right now. And that's why they are promoting this guy who murdered this high school student who apparently killed another high school student at a track meet. I mean, that's not okay. You don't kill people. And they're trying to create a culture of political violence. And it's not helpful. And it's around issues that people will never see eye to eye on. Abortion, great example, right? Some people really believe abortion is wrong and should be illegal. Some of them believe abortion is wrong, but should be legal. Some of them think abortion is not wrong. But when it comes to the abortion issue, people are never going to change their minds. So if Americans start killing each other over abortion, nothing's going to change. No one's going to change their mind, right? And the cultural stuff, right? And that right now there's a false polarization called left and right. Left and right. Are you on the left or are you on the right? I thought I was on the left. For almost my entire adult life, I thought I was on the left, but the left has informed me that I'm not on the left. Apparently, I'm a secret right-wing fascist because I don't think that we should be actively focused on trying to demand that people with penises go into women's bathrooms. Apparently, I'm on the right because I don't make demanding that men be able to participate in women's sports the central issue, right? And I've been told I'm unwelcome in left circles because I won't, join these culture wars. News to me, and I was also told I'm unwelcome in left circles because I waved the American flag, but apparently is the flag of white supremacy. I thought it was the flag of the country I lived in, but apparently it's the flag of white supremacy. And even though Martin Luther King waved it and Bernie Sanders waves it, me waving it means that I am apparently a Nazi. Because I wave the American flag. And so therefore, and on top of that, I believe in economic growth, right? And everyone knows growth is bad, right? Growth is bad and we need degrowth to save the planet, blah, 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 blah. The left hates my guts. I've spent my entire adult life doing leftist things. I was a member of the Workers' World Party for 8 years. I was very close to Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General, but apparently I'm just an evil right winger. But I'm telling you, the left-right divide is not real. The left-right divide about cultural issues, about, are you pro-abortion or anti-abortion? Are you pro-gay marriage or anti-gay marriage? Do you like Trump or hate Trump? These are not real issues. The real issue is left and right. Americans are sick and tired of these wars around the world. Left and right, Americans are sick and tired of our country falling apart economically. Left and right, Americans want good paying jobs. Left and right, Americans want their freedoms protected and they want the right to have free speech and they want the government to not be kicking down doors and arresting people, whether it's for being pro-Palestine or for being pro-Russia or for being pro-gun or for being anti-abortion or anything. We think that as Americans, we have the right to take whatever position we want. We can be pro-Palestine, we can be anti-abortion, we can be pro-Russia, we can be pro-Cuba, we can be pro-gun, we can be pro-Trump, we can be at the Stop the Steal on January 6th because we're Americans. We have the right to our opinions. And Kamala Harris wouldn't have had the right. She didn't have the right to send the FBI to Scott Ritter's house and go after Uhuru. And she did. And Donald Trump doesn't have the right to send the FBI to go after pro-Palestine students. You can be pro-Palestine. You can be pro-Russia. You can be pro-Uhuru. You can be pro-abortion. You can be pro-Stop the Steal. We have freedom in America. And the political police, the FBI, doesn't have the right to deprive us of our freedom of speech, to raid our homes and drag us to jail for engaging in free speech. We have the right to free speech. And Americans agree on this across the board. And on top of that, Americans agree that the wars around the world are not benefiting us. We blew the shit out of Afghanistan for 20 years, and Afghanistan got more and more unstable, and all that heroin came into our country, and we didn't get any richer as a country. And we occupied Iraq for decades, and we got worse as a country, and terrorism expanded, and Libya has been destroyed. None of this is benefiting America. America is getting poorer. Americans are losing their jobs and their homes, and our living conditions are going down, and prices are going up, and we're not benefiting from any of these wars around the world. while we pay for them with our tax dollars. Well, if you ask most Americans, they say end these wars and start reinvesting that money in our communities. People want good paying jobs. People want paved roads. People want high-speed railway. People want quality education. People want decent benefits. They want their priority, their life, to get priority over the needs of the global imperialists to foment wars around the world. These are things that Americans agree on. That's the kind of movement we need to build. And polarizing people around, are you for transgender or against it? Do you like Trump or do you hate Trump? Do you think American flags are racist, or do you like Colin Kaepernick? These aren't the issues we should be fighting about. We need to build a movement that is anti-war, a movement that is pro-freedom, pro-economic growth, pro-American communities, pro-people, pro-humanity. That's what we need. That is what we urgently need. And all the moralistic grandstanding that gets in the way of that is not helping. We've got to build this movement. And the way that they are determined to prevent this movement from arising is by fomenting political violence. And that's why they are advertising Luigi Mangione. Luigi Mangione is being turned into a saint in the mainstream media. They're trying to make Luigi Mangione into the most, beloved, amazing human being. And they're trying to make him a celebrity and all of this. And they're doing that for a reason. They're doing it for a reason. They're doing it because they want other people to do what he did and go out and kill somebody as a political statement, not join a movement, not be part of a group. No, they hate groups. And in fact, anytime anyone wrecks on a group and tattles on a group and says, my group was a cult, or someone was mean to me. Anytime someone does that, it gets widely amplified. People love to destroy organizations. People love to spread rumors and gossip. People love rivalries and all of that. They want everyone alone, isolated on their phones. They just want people to consume social media, not become activists. But they would love for people to go out and kill other people for their political views. They would love to see political violence. We have to make sure that that is not the case, right? We have to make sure that that is not the case. We have to make sure that political violence is not tolerated, right? And we have to not create a culture where political violence is celebrated, right? It's one thing if, during the 1950s and 60s, I'm sorry, I have to just reply to somebody here. Every so often I get a text I have to reply to. Sorry about that. During the 1950s and 60s, Black people who were having the civil rights movement wanted to take up arms to protect themselves from the Klan. That's not political violence. That's self-defense. If workers that are on strike and have a picket line and they don't want their picket line to be broken by company thugs and they take up guns to protect themselves, that's self-defense. But randomly finding somebody you disagree with or someone you think is a bad person for some reason, and maybe they are, right? This Brian Thompson guy, maybe he was a bad person. Doesn't matter. People randomly deciding somebody is a bad person and going out and killing them, that is wrong. And it's not helpful. And if people think that that is something that it's okay to do, we are in a really dangerous situation. Because if you haven't noticed, that's what happens in political circles. People immediately start tearing down other people. And if the left, which it seems like it's the left, Luigi Mangione is being paraded as a hero for the left. If the left normalizes a culture where you're a hero if you go out and kill somebody because you read on the internet that they're a bad person, what that leads to is mass killing and death. Political violence is not acceptable. And there's many examples of countries where widespread political violence hasn't led to some kind of revolution. It's led to huge amounts of demoralization, people being afraid to be involved in politics, a criminal culture. Jamaica is a great example. During the 1970s, Jamaica had a socialist president, a guy they elected who was a socialist leader named Michael Manley. And he wanted to make Jamaica a socialist country. He was a friend of Fidel Castro. And so what happened? The US government started funding a gang called Shower Posse that started killing people. And then there was this other gang that was created that started killing members of the Shower Posse. And the two political groups started shooting each other. And after a while, it got to the point that people in Jamaica didn't want to get involved in politics because they didn't want to get killed. And so they started leaving the country and moving to the United States. They didn't get politically active because they didn't want to get killed. And Jamaica is now a deeply poor country full of crime. And, you know, it didn't happen. Michael Manley didn't turn Jamaica into a socialist, anti-imperialist country, right? Escalating to violence, right? It's not a good strategy. The years have led in Italy, and you can look at the way they manipulated things in Northern Ireland and the way they used the Protestant fanatics to go after the IRA, the way they manipulated different IRA factions against each other. And this is, again, creating a culture of political violence, especially a culture of red team versus blue team, left versus right political violence is really, really dangerous. It's really, 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 really dangerous. It's extremely dangerous, and it's got to be opposed. It has got to be opposed. And I am thinking that after our convention, the Center for Political Innovation, we need to launch some kind of mass effort against political violence. We need to start doing workshops against political violence. We need to start educating people about the dangers of political violence, because this is a threat to our security, right? And that if they create a polarization where there starts being, you know, Luigi Mangione wannabes going out and killing Trump supporters going out and killing Luigi Mangione, this is a really dangerous situation. We don't need this in America. We don't. We need to oppose political violence. It's very, very dangerous. I love my country, folks. Let me reemphasize that. I love my country. I am an American patriot. I don't want to see what happened to Jamaica in the 80s happen to America. I don't want to see what happened to Italy in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the years of lead, happen to America. I love my country. I don't agree with the system that our leaders have committed to, that system of imperialism. But that system is not good for America. That system is destroying America. And that's why I'm against it. I want jobs, schools, and healthcare, not war around the world, not a low-wage police state, right? And if we don't love our country, we have to shut the fuck up. And I'm serious about that, right? You know, if you don't love your country, you know, no one says you have to love your country. You don't have to. But if you don't love your country, you have no business trying to lead it. And that's what we're trying to do. We would like to lead the country. We would like to become the leaders of the country. And if you don't want to lead the country, if you just want to comment on the internet and you just, oh, I'm mad at the government, I'm mad at the system, well, that's great, you know, good for you, but you're not going to change anything. If you're serious about building a mass movement, your aspiration should be to lead the country. And why should anyone let you lead the country if you don't love it? We should love America. We should love America. And I do love America. I do love America. I don't love a lot of the system here, and I don't love a lot of what our country has done, but it's taken me a long time. I've had a long spiritual journey. I've traveled around the world. I've reconnected with God. I love America. I am proud to be an American. I am proud of John Brown. I am proud of Alexander Hamilton. I am proud of Eugene Debs and Gus Hall, and I am proud to be an American. I am proud of the American Revolution. I am proud of the abolitionist movement. I am proud of Harriet Tubman, and I am proud to be an American. And I love my country. And I know that my country is in a world of hurt right now because of the fact that we have become an imperialist country and that we are sitting at the center of a global imperialist system. Look, I'll tell you all this story. I've told it before, but you know, I'll tell it again. You know, I had a grandfather who was from Missouri. And, you know, Missouri is a great state. There's people watching this right now from Missouri who I love. Missouri is a great state, but I think anyone who's been to Missouri would say that, you know, older men from Missouri can be politically incorrect sometimes. I think that's fair, isn't it? Right? That older men from Missouri will often say things that are not politically correct. My grandfather was one of those old men. My grandfather had fought in the Second World War. He had been in the U.S. Marine Corps and then later the U.S. Navy. And he was a very successful businessman. He was a salesman, and he was from Missouri, and he lived in Texas for a while. He lived in Missouri for a while. He was a good guy, right? Good guy. But he also, he was not politically correct, I guess you could say. And my grandfather, I remember I was over at his house one time when I was a small child, and we were all getting ready to go to bed, and the screen door popped out of the sliding, right? You have the screen door, you have your regular door, and then you have the screen door. The screen door popped out, and he was very angry about it. He said, "God damn it, this house must be built on top of an Indian graveyard." Now, I did not know what that meant, right? I was a child. I was like, this house is built on top of a graveyard? Are there ghosts here? And my parents had to explain to me that was an expression. That was an old, outdated, racist thing that people said, that if you were in a house and things broke, you'd say, "Oh, this must be built on top of an Indian graveyard," right? It was like, it was an old racist superstition. It was like an expression that my grandfather was saying, right? It's like the movie Poltergeist, that kind of thing. I didn't know about that. But I think about that now as an adult. Because if you really think about it, this whole country is built on top of an Indian graveyard and an African graveyard from the transatlantic slave trade, and a Vietnamese graveyard, and a Korean graveyard, and a Mexican and Chicano graveyard. And if we take the logic behind that superstition seriously, this whole country is cursed, because this country has a whole history of slavery and expansionism and murdering Native Americans and brutality and ugly wars around the world. There were sweatshops and indentured servants. And I mean, you go down the line, there's so much evil in the history of America. There's evil in the history of other countries too, but this country was established in a pretty violent, impure, ruthless, and cruel way. And if we think that that doesn't affect us, we think we can just say, well, that's the past, that's got nothing to do with us, we're wrong. In the legal profession, they talk about fruit of a poison tree, right? That if the police come into your house and they don't have a warrant, if they find something, that is inadmissible because it was acquired in an impure way. It is fruit of a poisoned tree. Well, America is fruit of a poisoned tree. America was acquired in an impure way, and the curse of all these evil things from our past is hanging over us. And we can't pretend that that's not true. But we're not going to cure ourselves with woke magic, because that's really what woke people are trying to do. They think if they just say the magic words, they can make the curse go away, right? If they go, in the name of white privilege and in the name of intersectionality, in the name, and they think they can make the curse go away. They can make the ghosts go away by saying the magical leftist buzzwords. In the name of white privilege, in the name of intersectionality, in the name of competing narrative. They think if they just mutter the right magic words, and if there's the right number of representative people of different minorities on the TV show or elected to office, and if they say mass incarceration and systemic racism enough, it'll all just go away if we all just say the right words. And the problem isn't the system, it's those poor white people, right? It's those Trump supporters, those poor people that won't say the right magic words. And if you just say our magical incantation, right? The power of Judith Butler compels you. The power of Judith Butler compels you. If you just say that magically, then it'll all go away. And so the wokeification of America is some really pathetic attempt at exorcism, right? It's in the name of DEI, diversity, equity, conclusion, be gone. They think they can make the ghosts of America's past go away with magic words. That's what they think, right? That's what they're trying to do, and it won't work. It won't work because the problem is in the economic foundations. The problem is the economic system. That is the problem. It's not the magic words. It's not the lack of DEI. It's not the lack of intersectionality. It's not the lack of books written by transgender, queer, Puerto Rican lesbians. It's the economic system. And the economic system that began with slave ships in Africa and the murder of Native Americans continues with the destruction of Libya and the funding of Israel's crimes against the Palestinians and the sending of billions of dollars to Nazis in Ukraine. It is the economic system that must be uprooted. It is the economic system that must be uprooted. And we need an economic system that puts people first and invests in people. That is what we need. And until we change the economic system, and until we change the economic foundations of the country, none of this is going to change. And your stupid magic words, DEI, DEI, the power of Judith Butler compels you, it's not going to change anything. I don't believe in your word magic. I don't believe in your stupid woke word magic. And I don't think you're better than me because I didn't go to NYU and study gender studies so I could talk down to hardworking people and call them racist. I don't think you're better than me because you can do that. I don't think you're better than me because you're wealthy enough to go to a Reform synagogue that says abortion is okay, or go to a mainline liberal church that says abortion is okay. I don't think you're better than me. I don't think you're better than me because you've got a rainbow flag. I don't think you're better than me because you buy fair trade coffee. And I'm not going to buy into any of this. No magic words are going to save us. The problems are in the economic foundation of the system, and the way out of it is populism. Building a mass movement. The people are not the enemy. It is the masses of people in their millions who are the makers of history. And it is the masses of people that we must embed ourselves with, and we must learn to love. We must love our people. Love the American people, the Black Americans, the white Americans, the Cuban Americans, the Latino Americans, the Arab Americans. We must love the American people. We must love the American culture. We must love the American religion, the American way of life. We must embrace America's belief in hard work and innovation and growth and optimism. And we must weaponize that against this satanic imperialist system that is grinding countries into poverty, including this country, and spreading war and chaos around the world and right here in America. That is what we must do. And if we don't do that, and if we follow and we play along with the woke synthetic left and their magic buzzwords and their woke crap, we are only deluding ourselves. And if I wasn't serious, if I was not serious about everything that I say to you, I would have been able to stomach it. I would have been able to follow the rules and be a good leftist, but I'm not. And I will tell you why I'm not. I'll tell you the day that I decided I wasn't going to be able to play along with any of this bullshit any longer. And that was the day when I was in the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I was standing in the auditorium, the mausoleum where Khomeini is buried. And the supreme leader of Iran stood in front of 20,000 Americans, and they began chanting, "Death to America, death to America." And tears rolled down my face because I was standing in a stronghold of anti-imperialism, the center of the axis of resistance, the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I was seeing with my own eyes that 20,000 people, America, my homeland, my people, was synonymous with war and empire and murder and death. And that causes me a huge amount of pain because I know the true interest of America is defeating this satanic internationalist globalist system. That is the true interest of the American people. And that if I was serious about politics, I couldn't continue fooling around. The time to speak falsely is over. Let us not speak falsely now, said Bob Dylan. The hour is getting late. And that is where I'm at. And we must build a movement, a patriotic movement, a pro-working people movement, a pro-working families movement to defeat imperialism. We have to take this seriously. We love our country. We love America. And we want to see America reborn economically beyond this system of war and death and destruction and chaos and depopulation and degrowth. We are pro-humanity. We are pro-working families. And this is the perspective. And it's not popular. It's not trendy. It doesn't win any awards in leftist circles, but it's what must be said. And I am going to keep saying it until I breathe my last breath. I am going to keep saying it until I've delivered my last speech, until I've written my last book. This is what I am about. We've got to build a movement to save this country from imperialism and to stand in solidarity with the people of the world, to get America beyond the satanic curse of colonialism, imperialism, and all the evil things in our past. That's what we must do. That's what we must do. And if you're serious, you'll come along with me. And if you don't have the courage, and if you are not up for it, that's fine. I am done chasing after people. I'm done pandering to people. I am at the point where I have got operations to do. I've got operations to carry out. There's a job that needs to get done. And if you want to get that job done, be my guest. Come on board. And if you don't want to get that job done, fine, not my problem. Straight is the gate and narrow is the way. And we have a job to do. We have a job to do. This movement needs to be built, and nobody else is doing it, and we've got to build it. And I didn't want to build it. A lot of people think I started CPI because I wanted to be a great leader. I wanted to be a great popular leader. That's not true. I joined the Workers' World Party because I believed in the Workers' World Party. I wanted the Workers' World Party of Sam Marcy to be the party and the organization. And even as I saw that group failed, I stayed in it for 8 years because I was committed, because I wanted to build that movement. But I saw that they just weren't going to do it. They went all in and they decided to be woke. And after I left the Workers' World Party, I spent time in Iran, I spent time in Russia, and I spent time in the global anti-imperialist countries. I went to Venezuela, and I started to understand why the Workers' World Party could never build the movement that was needed. And I began to understand the problems of leftism. And I began to understand why classical Soviet-style Marxism-Leninism will never return, and why Cuba and North Korea would like to be more like China and Vietnam and have market sectors, and why in Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro is a Roman Catholic, and Daniel Ortega is a Roman Catholic, and the leader of the Russian Communist Party is an Orthodox Christian, and why Marxism-Leninism, Soviet-style Marxism-Leninism, that has its origin in the destructive aesthetic of the French Revolution and that desire to tear things down, why that is not the way forward, why you need a market sector to build a prosperous planned economy in our time, why it is that you cannot appeal to people's desire to rebel, and you cannot utilize the dialectical materialist philosophy to build a movement, because if you do that, it will lead people to a destructive, pessimistic, rageful place, an ideology that says change only comes through conflict, an ideology that rejects spirituality and connecting to a higher power. That ideology cannot be the basis for building the movement that we need. And while we celebrate and we understand what Marx wrote about socialism and about the need for a planned economy and the need for the banks, factories, and industries to be rationally planned and organized, and the need to overcome the irrationality of the market, we also understand that the dialectical aesthetic and the red flag and the burn it down, tear it down feeling, and the rejection of any connection to anything spiritual or higher, why that is not going to work in building a serious movement. And that's why we are a new stage. The Center for Political Innovation represents a totally new stage in anti-imperialism. We are the cutting edge. We are innovating, and we are building a movement like nothing else. And all the other people that are trying to argue that they're the true communists or whatever, they're stuck in the past. We were doing that 3 years ago, 2 years ago. We're done doing that. We're not interested in being the true communists. We're not interested in that. We're interested in changing the world. We are interested in building the movement that will save our country. We're done with child's play. We're done with LARPing. We're done with play acting. We're done with internet fandoms. We're building the movement that urgently must be needed. Right now, thousands of these books are being distributed in Chicago, and people are learning about who the Houthis really are and why, if they know their heritage as Americans, they shouldn't hate the Houthis. That's what they're learning. In addition to that, right now, door knockers are being put on doors for our big conference in Chicago. Right now, people in Los Angeles are going to the Los Angeles Book Fair to hand out leaflets for our upcoming workshop. Right now, we are planning to hold an event with the Uhuru movement to celebrate and expose how important their victory in the courtroom against the FBI was. We're doing real work. We're doing real work because it must be done, because no one else is doing it, because other jokers and fools are not doing that work. And this work must be done. And I'll tell you, these peace talks that are happening in Russia right now, there's been no louder voice in America that was for it. I spoke to Russian President Putin directly. I was in the same room with Putin. I got on the microphone and I said to Putin directly that the American people do not want this war in Ukraine. I talked about the Uhuru case. I talked about how relations between the USA and Russia are not good. I talked about how inspired. You can go watch the clip of me talking to Russian President Putin. I spoke directly with Iranian President Riazi, the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I spoke to him, and I directly spoke to him. And we had a long conversation at the United Nations that was screened on international television for millions of people. YouTube banned it. You can watch it on Rumble. I spoke with 2 heads of state. When Tsai Ing-wen, the so-called president of Taiwan, came to the United States to beg for more weapons and to escalate, to try and push an anti-China campaign, I confronted her on the streets of New York City. And I said, stop selling war in our country. We don't want you here selling war to Americans. We love our country and we don't want your war propaganda here. And I confronted Tsai Ing-wen on the streets of New York, not as a woke liberal, not as a shill for the Chinese communists, but as an American who did not want her lying anti-China war propaganda. China is not our enemy. And I said that over and over and over again to the so-called president of Taiwan, to her face. I'm telling you, we're serious. We're serious. We've been organizing protests in America, peace with Russia, peace with China, negotiate with Iran. We're doing it. We are a serious organization. And there's a lot of jokers out there. And, you know, I'm just telling you, we're serious. We're serious. And we don't even need to acknowledge such people. People that want to stay on the internet and gossip and create drama, people that want to shit talk. We got a job to do. We're focused on getting our job done, and we are marching forward. And no, I'm not backing down. And no, I'm not stopping. And I'm not stopping anyone else. You know, Noah, member of our organization in Boston, he's in the chat. He just made an amazing video about innovationism. Great stuff. And he was with us in Russia at the festival. And we got great members. You know, Penny, a member in Minneapolis, is making great videos, doing great outreach in Minneapolis. And we're working with all kinds of people. We're not about stopping anybody, but we're not going to stop either. We're not stopping anybody else, but we're not stopping. And I am so tired of people that are more concerned with trying to be the king of some irrelevant fringe anti-imperialist movement than building among the masses. We've got to get to the masses of people. We've said out of the movement to the masses from the beginning of these streams. You go back to stream number 1, I was saying out of the movement to the masses. Well, it's more real than ever. Out of the movement to the masses, we've got to build the movement this country urgently needs. We have got to do it because no one else is doing it. So there you go. Yes, we had the Peace MAGA campaign. We were at Madison Square Garden. Phil was there with me. We had a big banner. Only peace can make America great again. And we got mentioned in New Yorker magazine because so many people saw us there with our huge banner outside of Trump's inauguration, outside of Trump's big rally in Madison Square Garden, then later at Trump's inauguration. We've done so much. Our organization, I mean, and we have really played a pivotal role. We really have. You know, between the book that we published about Kamala Harris that was so threatening to Kamala Harris, they banned it the day she became the Democrat nominee. And then we got a huge amount of attention because they banned our book, and then it was everywhere. I mean, we have done so much with such limited resources and such, you know, such a small membership. We're not a huge group. We have dramatically impacted the conversation, and all kinds of people with way more money and way more resources and way more social media clout and attention haven't done jack shit. And that's on them, not our problem, not our problem. But anyhow, folks, I see that there are 2 Rumble rants that have come in. And I also see that somebody, I think I received 1 super chat, or no, 2 super chats. And 2 super chats, both from the same guy, from Owen. But that's okay. All right. So why don't we do the roll call? Names and locations. I'll call you all out as I see you. And then I will answer people's questions, and then we'll be done for tonight. That's how we'll do it, because we've almost at 2 hours, and it's been a good show for tonight. I'm glad to be back. I'll do this tomorrow night. I always do weekend streams, so I'll be back tomorrow night. I just, I had to get over my illness. So we got Deha in Seattle. Shout out to Deha. Brooklyn in the house. Phil, and say a prayer for Phil. He's going on some travels. He's got some important work coming up with his health ministry. Say a prayer for Phil. Was talking to Phil today. Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. Phil Sang in Miami, Florida. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. David in San Jose, California. Courtney from Northern Virginia. Tony in Tasmania. David in Los Angeles. You coming to the workshop in Los Angeles? You can sign up down below. Timoshenko in St. Louis. Patch in Arizona. Super chats. You got to send me a Cash App. Caleb Moppin 22 or a Rumble Rant. Ryan in Kansas City. David in Hamilton, Ontario. Jacob in Wisconsin. Boston in Massachusetts. Noah, shout out to you. And check out Noah's channel. He's got a great video he just did. London in DeHouse. Ian in the Yukon. Apache says thank you. Bellingham in Washington. Alex in Brazil. Scablins in Washington. Stefan in Denmark. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Names and locations. Names and locations. Hell yeah, incoming. All right. Very good. Miles in Oakland. Welcome, welcome, welcome. St. David's, Bermuda. Yeah, here, I'll put it on the screen, the way that you can send a super chat, right? There we go, right? There you go. Caleb Moppin 22. Or Miles in Oakland, St. David's, Bermuda. And we got 2 super chats that came in from Hemp Car. And so we'll do those Rumble Rants from Hemp Car, and then we'll do these 2 super chats from Owen. And if there's other super chats, I guess he said incoming, so maybe he's sending some. Cash App Caleb Moppin 22 for the super chats. All righty. So Hemp Car, he says, if you look at the Boston Globe's Twitter right before the incident, they said they'd be doing a bomb drill before the bombings happened. That's interesting. And that's the Boston Marathon bombing. I'm curious about that. I'll look into any documentation of that. But yeah, the Tsarnaev brothers were known to the American government, and their parents were heavily involved in U.S. government efforts to work against Russia and Chechnya and counter gangs. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. So there we go. And then there's another one from Hemp Car. Oh, it's the same one. It's just the same super chat. I have it twice, Hemp Car. I have it twice. You said you only sent one. It's funny because I see 2 of them on my screen, but it's only one. Okay, well, that makes it easier. It was only one then. All righty. And then the first Cash App from Owen, he said, I sent you a GIF, leftist street cred. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate your gift. And then he also said, did Ohioans love this country in 1762? I assume you're referring to a specific incident. 1762, I mean, generally 1776, the signing of the preliminary Treaty of Paris, which ended the 7 Years' War, right? That's the French and Indian War. Okay. Well, obviously not. And there was a very, very brutal massacre of Native Americans in Ohio, the massacre at Genidin-Hutton, where a lot of Native Americans who had converted to Moravian Christianity were very brutally killed at Genidin-Hutton. I mean, this is part of our history, right? There is some ugly racist shit in America's history, and there's no reason to gloss over that or pretend that it's not there. But there's no reason to say that's all of who we are and to give up our claim on this country's heritage as revolutionaries, as anti-imperialists, as advocates of the rights of all, as advocates of optimism and growth and development. Why do we have to give up our right to the history of this country? Why do we have to hand it over and say, oh, if you love America, you can't be related to us? I mean, we just give up loving the country you leave and we give it to our political enemies. That's a stupid thing to do. It's a stupid thing to do, but it's based on this anti-populist loser mindset, this idea that we're just being a leftist means you're alienated and you're mad at everybody. No, we want to win. We want to be the government of the United States. And if we don't love this country, we have absolutely no business claiming that we should be the government. I'll just tell you that much. So there you go. There you go. All right. Is that another super chat? I think it is. All right. Another super chat from Deha. He says, I survived the Boston Marathon bombing. Damn. Really, Deha? You were there? That's crazy. I want to interview you about that. That's wild. If I have a chance to sit down with you, we should do an interview about that or something. That is wild. I'm glad you weren't injured, or maybe you were injured, but I'm glad you weren't disfigured from it. I know there were people who, were lifelong marathon runners who lost their legs, as a result. I mean, it was a horrendous incident. Absolutely horrendous. I'm glad you survived. I hope you didn't suffer too badly. Yeah, let's definitely talk. I had no idea, Deha. That is absolutely wild. We have a survivor of the Boston Marathon bombing in our chat. That is absolutely wild. That's an absolutely wild story, Deha. Wow, I never would have guessed that. I know you mentioned that you'd been in Boston for a while, but that is wild. Let's definitely talk about that, Deha. Let's definitely talk about that. That is very, very wild. So, hey, I'll just mention a few things. My latest book that I wrote is called Khrushchevism, a study in psychological warfare. However, I have been publishing little books using other things I've written. Like, there's a chapter in my big MAGA book on Bonapartism. So I published it as a small booklet called What is Bonapartism? In my textbook, I talk about the history of William Z. Foster and the Communist Party. So now we have William Z. Foster and the Communist Party. I've been publishing a lot of little pamphlets for Amazon that are cheaper because I realize those cheaper books sell more. It doesn't cost anything to publish a book on Amazon. And so I've been doing that. The latest one is a book that just came out today. It's all my writings on Venezuela over the years that I've published. And I'm trying to do that because I think that's helpful, because I think that's a good way of doing things. You're under no obligation to buy them. And you probably, if you've been, buying my books, you probably already have that material. It's just, you don't have it in the form of a small pamphlet. More auto tunes to come. Oh, that's wild. Okay. I was sent, Owen sent me an image of myself dancing with Boots Riley. Yeah, that's wild. So, yeah, that's going to be amusing. Okay. Yeah, I did meet Boots Riley and I did interview Boots Riley once, but I guess now there's an image of me dancing with Boots Riley. Well, thank you. And I can't wait to see that, Owen, and great work. I'm publishing these little pamphlets, so they're there. If you want one, great, whatever. But I'm just letting you know, I'm trying to do as many of them as I possibly can, just so they're out there. So if somebody's looking for William Z. Foster, they'll have it. They have a chance to come across this, right? So I'm just doing that. It's a thing that I'm doing, but it's reproductions of my other work in like a smaller form. But the most recent new piece that I have is this book, Khrushchevism. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to start reading this book on this stream. So I'm going to read the introduction to this book tonight. So this is the introduction, and I'm going to read the introduction. So here we go. This book is being written with the assumption that it will probably not gain a massive audience, though such a thing would certainly be embraced if by chance it could somehow be arranged. Books that I have written, such as Kamala Harris and the Future of America, Bread Tube Serves Imperialism, Who Are the Houthis, What Are They Fighting For, were written with the news cycle and social media platforms in mind, hoping that they would attract an audience among people who wanted a deeper understanding of current events. These books have sold thousands of copies, and I am proud to have written them. My hope is that Kamala Harris, BreadTube, the Houthis, or whatever the popular topic served as a vehicle through which I was able to open people's minds and teach them about deeper principles and concepts and the struggle against globalism, imperialism. This book is written about a historical topic and a very communism-oriented topic, and it approaches it from a particularly unique and specific angle. This causes me to believe that readership will be limited, despite the fact that the text culminates far more research, wrangling, and analysis than many other texts. Regardless, I have devoted so many hours of research, investigation, compilation, and composition to this book because it serves an organizational purpose. This book examines how Khrushchev devastated the global communist movement in 1956 by giving a tirade against his predecessor, Joseph Stalin. The book goes on to explain how Khrushchev helped to cultivate a mindset that was already brewing in Western countries among leftist intellectuals. How this mindset has been actively promoted by intelligence agencies, what this mindset teaches us about the psychology of illiberal organizations, and how the liberal order thrives on this type of thinking and depends on it, and how we can incorporate this knowledge of what we are facing into the struggle to build an anti-imperialist movement in our time. Marx wrote as an activist. In composing this text, I am forced to recall a bit of wisdom that was often related to me by older activists when I first got involved in political struggles. They said to me, "Marx doesn't make sense if you aren't part of the movement." The numerous older people who told me this bit of wisdom usually reflected on how it was common for universities to offer courses on Marxism in the philosophy department. These courses tended to attract an excited number of young radicals who would sign up only to end up entirely bored and often completely inoculated against Marxism. They expected to learn about exciting struggles for justice and instead found themselves decoding archaic polemics that made little sense in our time. As they made their way through old texts without receiving proper context, they received lectures from professors invoking Thomas More's Utopia, Plato's Republic, describing the vaguely ever-present but often destructive desire of human beings to create an egalitarian world, while leading the class in esoteric debates about morality and ethics. The reason Marx's works are so hard to get through for university students and rarely inspire them in such a context is because these students are not themselves involved in building a political movement and trying to mobilize the masses. Marx was not writing tomes to reflect on the nature of reality for academics. He was writing pamphlets explaining the differences between his comrades in the Communist League, who fought in the streets and fields of Germany in 1848, and other radical organizations. Marx was composing guides to action and textual orientation for those who built the International Working Men's Association as it organized strikes and built labor unions. Marx was an activist. He was heavily involved in the struggle for democratic rights against censorship and authoritarianism that remained from feudalism across Europe. Marx's followers were heavily involved in labor struggles among factory workers in Britain and across the continent. Marx was also key in organizing solidarity with the struggle to defeat slavery in the United States, serving as the foreign correspondent of the New York Tribune and organizing a mass meeting of anti-slavery unionists in London. Marx's works have to be understood as the documents and communiques of someone heavily involved in organizing. They are written assuming the reader is another activist, deeply involved in the same struggles and listening to the same contemporary debates, trying to maneuver and organize in the same context. Marx's pamphlet, The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, is written in the context of a defeated labor uprising and the rise of a military dictatorship in France. It is full of contemporary references, Latin phrases, and even jokes that were well understood by everyone in Paris in 1852, but are completely lost on us now. Marx's The Poverty of Philosophy was a lampoon of one of the most widely read books among radicals at the time, written by anarchist Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, with the title itself being a clever jab. Marx's critique of the Goethe program was a harsh polemic against the cliches of many uneducated socialists at the time who did not understand economics. Marx was outraged to see these assumptions about the redistribution of wealth sanctified into the official program of the German Social Democratic Workers' Party. So he spoke up with a thorough point-by-point debunking. Marx is hard to read without understanding the context. Some context can be provided by opening up Wikipedia and learning about the figures involved and events of the time. However, an essential part of the context cannot be understood without simply being an activist yourself. This is what Mao Zedong was hammering home in his text, Where Do Correct Ideas Come From? Mao wrote of correct ideas, quote, "They come from social practice and from it alone. They come from three kinds of social practice: the struggle for production, the class struggle, and scientific experiment. It's man's social being that determines his thinking. Once the correct ideas characteristic of the advanced class are grasped by the masses, these ideas turn into material force which changes society and changes the world. In their social practice, men engage in various kinds of struggle and gain rich experience both from their success and their failures." Later, Mao spoke to a group of university students, and putting it more hyperbolically, "It is only when there is class struggle there can be philosophy. It is a waste of time to discuss epistemology apart from practice. The comrades who study philosophy should go down to the countryside. They should go down this winter or next spring to participate in the class struggle. Those whose health is not good should go too. Going down won't kill people, and all they'll do is catch a cold, and that just put on a few extra suit of clothes and it'll be all right. University students should start going down this winter. I am referring to the humanities. Students of natural sciences should not be moved now, though we can move them for a spell or two. All those studying the humanities, history, political economy, literature, law, must every one of them go. Professors, assistant professors, administrative workers, and students should all go down for a limited time of 5 months. If they go to the countryside for 5 months or to the factories for 5 months, they will acquire some perceptual knowledge. Horses, cows, sheep, chickens, dogs, pigs, rice, sorghum, beans, wheat, varieties of millet. They will have a look at all these things. If they can go in the winter, they will not see the harvest, but at least they can still see the land and the people to get some experience of class struggle. That is what I call a university." This book serves an organizational purpose. At risk of offending or sounding highfalutin, I am warning my readers that this text will be hard to digest and perhaps even offensive to those who are not involved in building an anti-imperialist movement. The primary intended audience for this text is members of the Center for Political Innovation. However, this book is available to anyone who chooses to get their hands on it, whether by buying it online or otherwise. This book is written because our organization has been subjected to a wave of psychological operations intended to wreck and demoralize us. This shouldn't be surprising, given that our aim is to create an anti-imperialist movement in the United States, and we are operating in the political context of the 21st century. The nature of many of the efforts to break apart and repel our work has had an explicitly Khrushchevist character to it. This text is groundbreaking because rather than simply denying accusations or mistaken perceptions, or trying to reassure those with liberal concerns, we are taking the Khrushchevist incarnation of liberal thinking and organizational phobia head on. We are naming it, dissecting its roots and origins, and preparing our organization to be thoroughly bulletproof in the face of it. This text dissects a mindset that has become an essential part of Western discourse, showing its consequences in many contexts. It then guides readers in how they can combat it within themselves in order to be effective activists. This book is intended to be presented to every new member of the Center for Political Innovation as part of their political training, or at least to those who take on the accreditation process. Fighting against the Khrushchevist tropes implanted in our minds and resisting the wrecker culture fomented by social media is an essential part of remaining on the revolutionary road. Those unwilling To do that simply will not last. This book is meant to empower those who read it by pointing them to higher truths and nudging them to look inward, examining their own motivations, assumptions, and desires, and how these are wrapped up in their choice to become a revolutionary activist. We are in a new stage. I have a feeling that many hardline Marxist-Leninists will buy this book, hoping to find a defense of Stalin and a debunking of Khrushchev's 1956 tirade. They will most certainly find that in the following pages, most especially in the first chapter. And I hope they will not be disappointed by my efforts to tell the other side of the story regarding Stalin's leadership of the Soviet Union and the Communist International. However, there are other parts of this book that will undoubtedly confuse them. For example, I have a great deal of this book focusing on specific Trotskyite organizations and how, despite their political confusion, they played an anti-imperialist role to some degree and were dismantled by psychological operations of the Khrushchevist stripe. Furthermore, this book will delve into some of the flaws in the mindset created by dialectical materialism and how the roots and tradition of what is known as the left have a destructive side from which Khrushchevism draws its effectiveness in destroying organizations. This book gets psychoanalytical and talks about impulses and inherent drives motivating human behavior. It may even seem mildly religious at times, and this is an honest expression of the author's beliefs as a Christian who believes in God and accepts Christ as his Savior. There is no way to avoid the fact that innovationism, the ideology of the Center for Political Innovation, represents a new stage. We take the best from Marxism-Leninism, but we have left behind its weaknesses. Furthermore, we want nothing to do with the train wreck that calls itself communism in Western countries, which has lost almost every shred of optimism, hope, economic understanding, and anti-imperialism that it once had. We do not seek a place within communism, and the fact that you may denounce us as revisionists, deviants, or impure practitioners of Marxism-Leninism is of no concern to us. The urgent need of our time is to build a movement against the decaying order of globalism imperialism. The only hope for working families of the United States is to see their country join the rising new world of the BRICS, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Bolivarian alternative of Latin America, and the new wave of development and independence on the African continent. We need a government of action to fight for working families, and every effort must be made to oppose the danger of a new world war and the emerging low-wage police state. If you are involved in this struggle and in building an organization capable of impacting this struggle, not merely a fandom of commodified identity, you will need to address the problem of Khrushchevism. You will need to identify it and battle against it. This text, the culmination of years of research and analysis, is intended to lay the foundation for organizations that can effectively resist this mechanism of psychological warfare. It is time to create the solid block of resistance that the Western world needs, one that can mobilize working people and create an anti-monopoly coalition. This book will help us understand how to do this within the new terrain. I urge you to read with this understanding and take whatever knowledge and insights will be useful to you in doing so. I have added a brief personal note at the end of every chapter to serve as a kind of addendum. The topics of this book include the history of the Soviet Union, anti-imperialist movements in Western countries, psychology, spirituality, and much more. A brief personal note from the author is helpful to give context to the reader. That is the introduction to my new book, and we'll continue reading. I'm going to read the whole book on these streams and then cut and have an audio book of it. That's my intention. So I figured I would read the first introduction here tonight. And I guess that's everything. So I'm not seeing any more super chats, which is fine. So I'm going to say good night, you all. It's been fun. We'll be back tomorrow night. It's been fun. We have got so much to do. We are building a movement, folks. We are building a movement onward to July. I am thinking every day about July. Keep the date, July 12th, in your mind. Even if you can't come, just think about it. Just think about it. Pray for us. Picture us having a successful event, because we are going to have a successful event. We are going to kick ass in Chicago. Dare to struggle, dare to win.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.